Stars, they're just like us. They go on coffee runs in their sweats, they buy cat litter, and sometimes they hang out with aliens. Listen in as we close out the year with close encounters of the celebrity kind. Welcome to Shadowland, everybody.
Welcome.
This is a podcast that shines a spotlight on stories of the supernatural, mysterious, eerie, and unexplained. Stuff like dark matter,
Sentient plants,
synchronicity,
holographic universe theory,
prophecies,
ghost ships,
auras,
giants,
UFO hotspots,
Atlantis,
psychic abilities,
weird science buildings,
astral projection.
human pig hybrids.
Oh my God, we gotta do that.
Yes.
All that stuff.
And more.
And more. Lots more.
And I'm Seth Jablon.
I'm Christina Callery. And today we have a very special bonus episode.
Yep.
We're closing out the year. Bye-bye to 2019. And we actually opened with our very first episode. We did alien stories.
Yes.
And so we thought it would be fitting to do alien stories to close out the year.
Yes. Alien Stories Celebrity Edition.
Celebrity edition. So we have, we don't know what the other one is doing, but we've got a whole collection of super interesting, allegedly true celebrity encounters.
Yep. Well, I just have the one, but you have a collection.
Oh, you do? Okay. Yeah, I've got a whole bunch.
Okay. Cool. So do you want to go first then? I can't remember who went last time, but if you've got a collection.
Why don't you go first? I went last time. I think
okay.
I went.
You did? Okay.
Yeah.
All right, cool. So my celebrity alien encounter, really it's the story of Dan Aykroyd.
Okay.
Cool.
Awesome.
Yeah. So there's a bunch here, and so it's like kind of a collection of like there's actually a lot sort of to Dan Aykroyd, both as an actor and as a person in the sort of UFO world. But I'll just give you a few stories of his that sort of help highlight his involvement in that community. So
cool. I can't wait.
Okay. So the first one is started in 1987. So this is kind of what Aykroyd sort of points to as his the experience he had that really sort of launched him on the journey of becoming like a UFO guy. So in 1987, Aykroyd is in upstate New York. He's asleep in bed with his wife. At 3 a.m., he suddenly wakes up and screams, "I got to go outside. I got to go outside. They're calling me. They're calling me. They want me to see. They want me to see." And so, he
screams that?
He screams that out loud into the room, and his wife wakes up and tells him, "Oh, just go back to sleep," which I think basically he does. So he goes back to sleep. Later, it turns out that night at the exact same time, thousands of people in Canada, New York, and Vermont reported that they too had felt an urge to go outside, and many did, whereupon they saw a several-mile-high spiraling pink vortex.
Whoa.
So this was actually a mass sighting that happened in 1987. Yeah, vortex. Like I guess some sort of, by the descriptions, this like sort of spinning.
Like a tornado.
I don't know if it's like, I think it's light. Yeah, it's like light, but I think I don't know, it might have been, I don't know, vortex. I don't know if it was like dimensional, necessarily. It might have just been like a spiral of light of some kind. But that was sort of how they described it. But it's a crazy story that all these people felt this urge, talked about feeling there's some people went outside, some people didn't, but it was this feeling of them wanting to be seen, wanting, or that, that they're drawn outside because they want, someone wants them to see something. So that obviously had a huge effect on Aykroyd, both the experience and then learning later, like what actually happened that night. And, subsequently over the years, he becomes more and more interested in UFOs and UFOlogy and in the paranormal in general. But he actually becomes sort of expert on it. So much so that in 2002, he actually helps create a massive episodic documentary on UFOs for the Sci-Fi Channel.
So I have a question.
Yeah.
So was that his first experience up until that time? An only experience?
Well,
or
I don't...
Had other things been happening?
I don't exactly know. I mean, that's the one that he says, is his sort of the experience he had that started him on that journey. So I didn't read anything about him, saying he had experienced anything before that. He sort of points to that as the experience that started him on this journey. So I don't know if he had other paranormal experiences. He's had other ones, which I'll list, but I don't know exactly when those fall, but that was definitely one of the oldest ones.
Okay.
So then like I was saying, in 2002, he creates this documentary about UFOs with some very regarded UFOologists, including Dr. Stephen Greer, who I'm sure we'll do an episode on at some point, but he's like one of the big guys, especially right now. He did that movie Sirius, and I think there's a couple other that he did as well. But so they were actually 8 episodes in filming when one day after filming, Aykroyd goes outside for a smoke on 42nd Street in Manhattan. So I guess they're at some sort of studio there. I don't know, maybe doing interviews or something. I'm not sure exactly what they were filming, but they had laid down a lot of the documentary already. The production was almost over. And so he's standing there smoking a cigarette. His phone rings, and it's Britney Spears, who wants to discuss some upcoming SNL episode that she's, I guess, probably, performing in or whatever. And so as he's talking to her, he looks down 42nd Street and notices a black SUV with a tall man inside in a black suit. He said the man gives him this dirty look. And, as he sort of sees this man glaring at him, he's sort of like kind of glancing away, right? He sort of like glances in, glances out sort of thing, right? And sort of like does a double take, because it's strange, right? Like sort of seeing this sort of Men in Black looking person on 42nd Street, big black SUV is not strange on 42nd Street, but there was something about it. And he said he looks back and the SUV and the man had disappeared, which, it could be something weird out of the corner of your eye. It's very specific, but
right.
Certainly 42nd Street, nothing can get out of there that quickly, so that it's just an odd sort of event, right? Like there's no way like this thing sped off. But so he, this experience
plus the glaring,
right?
Yeah, he's getting the evil eye from.
Yep. So then 2 hours later, Aykroyd receives another phone call, and this time it's the Sci-Fi Channel, the network, telling him the documentary is canceled. And not only is it canceled, but what they shot will never air, and he's never given a reason why. So I think he tries to actually be like, look, we'll play it somewhere else. We'll make put in whatever, and they would not. Someone canceled it somewhere, and it will never be seen again, which is really interesting. Like this whole series of events, right? Like him feeling like he just saw Men in Black, and then like a couple hours later, I mean, just the fact that they, canceled this thing, obviously, there's things that don't air all the time, but, an 8-episode documentary that they just put away forever is suspicious in and of itself.
Yeah, that's an odd coincidence.
It's an odd coincidence. So he definitely brings that one up as like he's definitely into all the sort of UFO conspiracy theory, the truth that is out there, but they're not letting it out, sort of thing.
Right.
And he definitely counts this amongst that experience. So there's another occurrence for him. I'm not sure if it was before or after this one on 42nd Street, where he was in Martha's Vineyard, and he was on a trip there. And he said he saw these 2 UFOs moving in synchronicity about 50,000 feet up and moving quite fast, faster than he had seen any other aircraft move. And the number that was given is like 20,000 miles per hour, but I'm not sure how you would gauge that. All these numbers like 50,000 feet up, like I don't know what that means, but they were very high up in the sky, and they were sort of moving, these lights moving in synchronicity. And this is another experience that he had that he sort of counts amongst them. So
did he describe what the shape was or the color?
No, I didn't get any sort of color. It was just like these sort of bright lights to UFOs. I'm not sure. I mean, if they were 50,000 feet up, I imagine you're not seeing much of the shape of the thing, or it might just appear as a light. So those were the two, very specific UFO experiences that he had. He also had some. We also could have put him in our spectrophilia episode because apparently he said he also had sex with a ghost, which
With a ghost.
yes. So I think it was actually during the filming of Ghostbusters, he said he had an experience where a ghost actually gave him a blowjob, and I think that was actually while they were shooting, but even before that scene in the movie, it was like some weird thing. But he said that actually did happen to him.
Okay, and he was sober.
Well, I don't know about that.
Okay.
like all those dudes in the 80s, dude. I highly doubt.
Yeah.
But
Okay.
he stands by it. But,
Okay. All right.
So,
and
yeah.
it was kind of like a precursor to the actual scene where this happens, or did it actually inspire that scene?
It may have. I don't know. It's very like all the stories around that are like all like, pretty jumbled, but
Okay.
it's possible it had some connection there. But yeah, and so he's kind of he's this big character in the sort of UFO world. He's all into all the like stories, and he's definitely an eccentric character. And when you listen to him talk about all this stuff, he's quite knowledgeable, but many sort of find him like way too far out there. But for instance, he and his family created I don't know if you know this, the Crystal Skull vodka. I don't know if you know that. You know the vodka, right? It comes in a crystal skull.
I do. I've never tried it.
It's terrible. But I've definitely had it, and I kept the skull. I think I like put change in it or something.
Yeah, the skull looks pretty cool.
The skull's pretty cool. But yes, but for those who don't know, the impetus of the Crystal Skull vodka is based off of the legend of the Crystal Skulls. And I'm sure you've heard of them, Christina, or have you?
Yes,
yeah.
I've heard of them.
Okay, yeah. So for those who don't know, it's there's a bunch of lore surrounding these crystal skulls, which there's quite a bit. They're thought to have mystical or healing powers. They're thought to be from, some of them are considered Mayan. Some of them people think are from aliens.
Haven't they been found in different locations around the world?
Yes. So they've been, so a lot of the controversy surrounding them is there's never been a, archaeological discovery of them. So they've never been able to track exactly where they came from. And the couple that they do, which isn't good, right? It means that like, there's this skull, but if it didn't come from some archaeological dig, they have no idea where it came from. Which you could say is more mysterious, but you could also say doesn't lend a lot of credence to them being Mayan, for instance, because how could you possibly prove that? So there are also a couple specimens in, I think there's one in the museum in London, and the couple of them have been studied over the years, and that one in particular was determined to have been made in Europe in like the 1900s. So it was definitely not made by like an alien or like part of a Maya. It was like, they think now that a lot of them were created in a period in the 1900s in Europe where all this stuff, they were doing all these like cool archaeological digs and all this mystical stuff was happening, and so a lot of people were interested in that thing. So like the idea of a crystal skull, showing up in some shop in, Paris or something was probably exciting, for a lot of people, but doesn't necessarily mean that they even came from Maya. So a lot of people think they were just like sort of created as a part of the whole, hype going around archaeology, these archaeological finds and stuff. So none of them have been proven to be anything out of the ordinary.
Was it kind of like during the Victorian period when everybody was fascinated with the paranormal and seances?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
And also, like, I think they were like digging a lot in Egypt at that time. They were finding stuff in Mexico, and they were finding all these like Mayan ruins and stuff. So it was an exciting time, right? Like there was stuff popping up all the time. I mean, I even remember from my childhood there was a lot more stuff that they were finding. It seems like they found a lot now, and it's a little bit more rare for that to happen. But years ago they were finding tombs and temples and all this stuff, lost art. So anyways, but there's a lot of people that still believe there's, that these skulls have a certain sort of power to them. I think there's even one story about some shaman who gave it to, I think someone he had treated, someone with a disease that he had treated, and then she went around the world like healing people in the skull. So there's a lot of like great stories around them, but they're all like, pretty urban legend like. So, so that's the story of Dan Aykroyd and his alien experiences.
I didn't know a lot of that stuff, and I had no idea that he had a ghost sex encounter.
Yeah. I think I came across it during the Spectrophilia. I think I'd heard it before, but when we did that episode, I think I like came across it and was like, oh, we got to do one just more on him, because he's pretty, like I've seen him speak about this stuff, and I really wish we could have seen that.
Yeah, he really puts himself out there.
He really does. He does not give a fuck if you think.
Yeah, I respect
crazy.
that.
Yeah,
he is not worried about what people think. He doesn't give a fuck. He's just
So.
And he seems to have a sincere belief in all of this.
Yeah, he does, and he's sort of like a champion for the truth in the least, right? And so, I think he acknowledges. I've read a couple of interviews with him, and seen him, and some of these stories he knows, like it's hard to tell sometimes, but there's a lot of he sort of leans on a lot of the sightings and stories out there that do have a lot of credibility. And so, he's a big proponent of the sort of disclosure and whatever the government knows, of like actually being able to eventually get that out there. So anyways, cool.
Wow. Well, that was awesome.
So you want to...
Super interesting.
Yeah, he's an interesting
so
dude.
I have a whole bunch.
Okay, great. Awesome.
I thought we were doing what we did last time with the ghost celebrity stuff. I just have like so I'll just like rattle them off. I'll go through some of the short ones super quick, and then I have like a couple longer ones. All right. So the first one is Nick Jonas. Which I had no idea that he had an alien encounter, but about a decade ago or so, he apparently saw 3 flying saucers in his backyard in Los Angeles. And he was quoted as saying, "I looked at my friend and said, 'Are you seeing this, or am I losing my mind?' And then the friend confirmed that they saw the same thing. And after that, Nick went online and he saw that there were 3 similar sightings that had been reported 2 weeks earlier. So something was going on, he felt, and this sparked like an intense interest in the whole idea of UFOs and aliens. The next one, New York Knicks former player Baron Davis, he claimed that he was abducted by aliens when he was driving from Las Vegas to Los Angeles. Have you heard this story?
No.
Okay. So he's driving from Las Vegas to LA, and he said he suddenly found himself in what he described as a steel thing, where he encountered, quote, crazy-looking people, half human, half ugly-looking motherfuckers.
Whoa. And
they had bound his hands and proceeded to repeatedly poke him in the nose. Maybe implanting something, because on like all of the stories that you hear about alien
like up
implants,
his nose, or like
yeah, like in his nose. That's kind of like a common sight. But basically the next thing he knew, he woke up and he was back in his car and driving back toward California.
Oh, interesting. That's
Super
crazy.
weird.
I mean, that's like a huge difference. Like, seeing something in the sky is so much different than, actually having this memory or experience of meeting these creatures.
Right.
It's like pretty crazy, right?
Right. And it's interesting to me how these experiences occur kind of like in that weird sort of, in between sleeping and waking state. Like there's something that happens when you're in that state.
Interesting. Huh.
Yeah. A lot of paranormal things actually are kind of tied to that time frame.
Yeah.
So Sammy Hagar, he's had a couple encounters.
Okay, cool.
The first one when he was like a little kid, in an MTV interview, he actually remembered blacking out after he tried to fight off a UFO with rocks.
What?
I guess he was throwing rocks at this thing, and he first thought it was a floating car, and he was about 4 years old at the time.
Okay.
But then in his autobiography, he actually recounted a crazy dream that he had one night in around 1967. And he said, "I saw a ship and 2 creatures inside of the ship. I couldn't see their faces. They were connected to me, tapped into my mind through some kind of mysterious wireless connection. So they were like downloading shit into his brain. So 2 aliens apparently had him plugged into a machine, and they were using it to channel information into his brain directly. At this point, he started waking up, and the aliens started shouting a foreign, like, numerical code. I'm not really sure how he knew this was numerical, but I don't know. They're downloading info into his brain, so maybe somehow he, could translate it. But anyway, the machine shut down at this point, and then Hagar woke up in his bed, and the room was like totally white.
Dude, this is a crazy story.
Yeah, it's pretty.
I've never heard this
crazy.
before. Wow. Sammy Hagar, who knew?
Okay. So then, the next one, Lemmy, the late frontman for Motorhead, said that in 1966, quote, "This thing came over the horizon and stopped dead in the middle of the sky. Then it went from a standstill to top speed immediately. We don't even have aircraft to do that now, never mind then. So it was pretty eye-opening for me." So he was a believer.
Really? Huh. That one makes a little bit more sense, but yeah.
Okay. So David Bowie.
David Bowie?
Yeah. So he apparently, like, when he was younger, when he was a youth, he and his friends would see UFOs so often that they could actually time their arrival.
Wow.
And then later on, when he was an adult, he recounted once seeing an object hovering over a field that he thought was, quote, "a projection of my own mind, trying to make sense of this quantum topological doorway into dimensions beyond our own."
Wow.
I can't really translate that, but
what's interesting, like he definitely had this was definitely part of his sort of ethos and sort of worldview, right? Like
right.
He wrote songs about it, and it was like always on his mind. I think I'd heard he was very interested, but I didn't know about that sort of experience of his.
Yeah, I had no idea either. So apparently, like, there were these, early experiences he'd had that kind of awakened that whole interest in
But was that latter one in like upstate New York or something? I thought I remember.
It didn't say where it was.
He had a place up there, I think.
But could have been.
Interesting.
A lot of stuff happens
That's cool.
Okay. Muhammad Ali.
Wow.
He was also he had like a really strong interest in the whole UFO phenomenon. He claimed to have witnessed and been watched by UFOs on 16 different occasions. In describing one, he said, quote, "I happened to look up just before dawn, as I often do while running." So he was outside, going for a run, and there, hovering above us, was this brilliant light hanging as if by an invisible thread. At first, I thought it was a beacon projected from a helicopter, but moments later, a similar object passed in front of us. And this second UFO apparently had a glowing red trail behind it. And Ali said, "I brought it to the attention of my trainer, who was standing nearby, and we watched them come from behind the skyline and move slowly across the sky for at least 15 minutes. The best I can describe the sighting is to say they were just round and big." And at one point, Ali even saw what he described as a mothership. So some very, very large spaceship type of thing. And he said, "Before I could blink my eyes, the light had come down toward the mountains until it hovered right above the valley there. I knew I couldn't be dreaming. Sure enough, it was still there. This had to be one of those big ships they talk about. The UFO was streamlined and shaped sort of like a cigar, but blunt on both ends. I couldn't see any windows or anything, but I'm certain there must have been people on board."
Wow.
Okay. So kind of, I have another story that sort of ties into that, that shape of being cigar-like and
right.
blunt
I've
on
heard that
both
one
ends.
before. Right, yeah.
Okay. John Lennon. I had no idea.
Okay, yes.
Okay. So do you know who Uri Geller is?
No.
Okay, so he was an illusionist and purported psychic. He's pretty famous for bending spoons with his mind.
Okay, right, yes. Yeah.
Okay.
He was like the telekinesis guy or whatever.
Yes,
Right.
yes. So he was apparently a friend of John Lennon, and he's talked about an experience that he had. So one night, Geller was with John and Yoko in a New York City restaurant, and when the subject of aliens came up. Okay. Lennon then apparently took Geller to a quieter table where they could have a conversation in secret. And then he told him this story. And you got to keep in mind, this is all secondhand.
Right.
This is all according to Geller. But basically, he said that John told him, okay, you believe in this stuff, right? Well, you ain't fucking gonna believe this. And 6 months ago, I was asleep in my bed with Yoko at home in the Dakota building. And suddenly, I wasn't asleep because there was this blazing light around the door. It was shining through the cracks in the keyhole like someone was out there with searchlights or the apartment was on fire. That's what I thought, intruders or fire. I leaped out of bed and Yoko wasn't awake at all. She was lying there like a stone, and I pulled open the door. Then there were these 4 people out there. And Geller said he asked him, fans? And Lennon answered, well, they didn't want my fucking autograph. They were like little, bug-like, big bug eyes and little bug mouths, and they were scuttling at me like roaches.
Whoa.
At this point, Geller said John broke off and just stared at him before continuing. And he said, I've told this to 2 other people. One was Yoko, and she believes me. She says she doesn't understand it, but she knows I wouldn't lie to her. I told one other person, and she didn't believe me. She laughed it off and said I must have been high. Well, I've been high. I mean, right out of it, a lot of times. And I never saw anything on acid as weird as those fucking bugs, man. I was straight that night. I wasn't dreaming, and I wasn't tripping. There were these creatures, like people, but not like people, in my apartment. Okay.
Wow.
So then Geller asked him what they did to him, explaining that they must have been there for a reason. And Lennon answered, you're right. They did something, but I don't know what it was. I tried to throw them out, but when I took a step towards them, they kind of pushed me back. I mean, they didn't touch me. It was like they just willed me, pushed me with willpower and telepathy. So then Geller asked what happened next, and Lennon said, either I've forgotten, blocked it out, or they won't let me remember. But after a while, they weren't there, and I was just lying on the bed next to Yoko, only I was on the covers. And she woke up and looked at me and asked what was wrong, and I couldn't tell her at first, but I had this thing in my hands. They gave it to me. And at this point, Lennon reportedly reached into the pocket of his jeans and produced this metal egg-shaped object and gave it to Geller, saying he'd been carrying it around ever since, wanting to ask someone about it. Okay, so I got to break in here and say that there are multiple pictures of Geller holding this object, and we'll post those on our Instagram. But basically, it looks kind of like this brass-colored small metal egg, and only the ends are sort of blunted. So it's kind of like that whole cigar shape with the flattened ends kind of a shape.
Okay,
you know,
right,
it's
right.
vaguely egg-like, but the ends are sort of like rounded but blunted off at the edges. So Lennon reportedly said, keep it. It's too weird for me. If it's my ticket to another planet, I don't want to go there.
So he gave him this thing?
He gave him this thing, and Geller, there are multiple pictures of Geller holding it up so we can actually see what this thing looks like.
Wow.
But there's another encounter that he actually talked about on record in Interview Magazine. So in the liner notes of the 1974 album Wells and Bridges, Lennon wrote that on the 23rd of August, 1974 at 9 o'clock, I saw a UFO, and he signed his initials. So he was asked about this in the interview, and he said that he was very straight at the time, and he claimed that he saw, quote, a thing with ordinary electric light bulbs flashing on and off around the bottom, one non-blinking red light on top, around 100 feet away from him and hovering over a nearby building. And this was when he was on a break from his relationship with Yoko, and he was dating May Pang.
Oh, right, right.
But she corroborated the experience and said, quote, As I walked out onto the terrace, my eye caught this large circular object coming toward us. It was the shape kind of like a flattened cone, and on top was a large, brilliant red light, not pulsating as on any of the aircraft we'd seen landing at Newark Airport. When it came a little closer, we could make out a row or circle of white lights that ran around the entire rim of the craft. These were also flashing on and off. There were so many of these lights that it was dazzling to the mind.
Wow. That's crazy.
Yeah. Yes.
What an awesome story. I mean, they, I'd heard of the sighting, the last one, not in detail, but, there was always, I feel like I've heard that story a number of times where, John Lennon saw a UFO in Manhattan, right? But I'd never heard about him like seeing any, creatures. And, I knew the other one was sort of corroborated. And, it's interesting, like you think about all these like UFOs stories are always, people always sort of, I think, picture them happening in like the woods and, like on some like desolate road, which certainly a lot of them are. But there's actually quite a few of, UFO sightings in Manhattan. I actually met somebody.
We should do a whole.
We should do like a Manhattan UFO sightings like
episode. Yeah,
Whitley Strieber, I think, even talks about like being there's even
people being abducted,
people
from
being
their
abducted,
apartments
right,
and like
in the middle
like
of the city,
upper floors and apartment buildings.
Yeah, isn't that crazy?
It is crazy.
But this other one that that he actually like met these creatures or whatever, like that's crazy. Like I'd never heard that. But that one's only corroborated by the guy he told the story to.
Right. Exactly. I mean, the one was actually quoted from Lennon, the last one, in
I remember magazine. That one. Yeah.
But the other one, I mean, basically, it's just to us to decide whether or not we want to believe Tyler.
Right.
And his story.
Yeah, it kind of reminds me of...
But he does have the weird little egg thing.
Oh, right. It kind of reminds me of that other... you've heard of the Jackie Gleason apparently saw alien bodies. Like, there's a whole story about him being shown, but it's like one of those second...
You should have done that
I know. I just thought of it. Well, it was a similar sort of secondhand story actually told by his wife later, who talks about how he came home this one night and like slumped down on the couch and was like, I can't believe what I just saw. And, he was a big UFO guy, right? And so was apparently, I think, Nixon to some degree. And he actually, the story is that he took, that he told his wife at least, is that he was taken to this like facility and shown these like bodies of aliens that were like little...
Area 51?
No, I don't think it was that. It was... I don't remember exactly where it was. I'm trying to look here really quick, but it was Homestead Air Force Base in Florida, and they were 4 little embalmed aliens with small bald heads and disproportionately large ears, and ears, yeah.
Okay.
And I think they were in some sort of like fridge or something, like they were like being like kept.
Oh my God.
They were being like preserved or something like that.
So it was like an alien morgue.
Yeah, but they were being like at an Air Force base. Like they were definitely being like kept for whatever, study or I don't know what. Yeah. But yeah, the story is that Nixon took him in there, showed him to him, and just like blew his mind, right? Like, how do you... and then he just like... Okay. But I don't think he ever like corroborated that story, but yeah, that is the story.
That's so interesting.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, just the idea that like all these like celebrities are out there getting to see aliens because they're like friends with people in high places.
Oh my God, I'm so jealous.
I know, I'm super jealous. Like,
okay, so speaking of Nixon, we've all seen the famous picture of Nixon shaking hands with Elvis.
Oh, right, yes.
Elvis had alien encounters.
Really?
Apparently, yes. Okay, so apparently when he was 8 years old, he said that E.T. showed him the image of a man in a white jumpsuit singing before a huge crowd. And at the time, he didn't understand what that meant. He didn't know who that was, but it became clear later that they were showing him the future, kind of like a future projection of himself. And he also claimed to have seen strange moving lights while driving through the desert.
Wow, interesting.
Which is not that weird. A lot of people see that stuff.
Yeah, but...
Right. But after he died... Elvis's hairstylist, Larry Geller, so all of these Gellers with their secondhand alien stories, But his hairstylist said that he and Elvis had seen blue lights over Graceland when they were walking outside. And he also said that Elvis' father, Vernon Presley, claimed that a blue light had appeared over Tupelo, Mississippi when Elvis was born. And the quote was, his father told us he'd gone out to have a cigarette at 2 a.m. during the delivery, and when he looked up into the skies above their little shack, he saw the strangest blue light. He knew right then and there that something special was happening.
Whoa. It's downright biblical.
It gives new meaning. It is, and it gives new meaning to Blue Moon.
Yeah, right.
Which is one of my favorite Elvis songs.
Totally.
So I just have a couple more.
Sure, yeah.
Okay, so Fran Drescher. She once told the Huffington Post that she and her ex-husband, Peter, quote, both saw aliens before we knew each other, doing the same thing, driving on the road with our dads. We were both in junior high. A few years later, we met and we realized that we had the same experiences. I think that somehow we were programmed to meet. We both have this scar. It's the exact same scar in the exact same spot.
Whoa, that's crazy.
That is crazy. So were they both abducted and kind of, did they meet each other in a spaceship?
Right.
Who knows? And then finally we have Miyuki, I'm going to butcher this, but Hatayama, the former Japanese first lady. She's actually written about an experience. She said that one night, quote, while my body was asleep, I think my soul rode on a triangular-shaped UFO and went to Venus. Her husband thinks it was just a dream, but she is pretty sure that it was an abduction.
Huh, interesting.
Yeah.
Or something, right? Like there's
or something,
right?
Yeah. Well, again, we have that whole idea of like in between sleeping and waking.
Right.
And I remember years ago meeting somebody who was pretty convinced at the time that he'd been abducted by aliens, and he told me that he actually he didn't want it to happen again. It wasn't a pleasant experience, but he would listen to music when he was drifting off to sleep, and apparently it was like just having the music on and your brain engaged in that way, like listening to it, somehow would intercept their ability to take control of you while you were sleeping.
Huh, that's really interesting.
So there's some kind of idea out there that you're vulnerable when you're in the sleep state, or I don't know. It's pretty fascinating.
Well, yeah, maybe we'll do an episode on
and actually, when you talk, I mean, a lot of we've talked about this before, but a lot of paranormal experiences, even just like waking dreams, things like that, when people see shadow people, but also astral projection.
Yep.
Apparently, like the ideal time for that to happen is kind of like when you're in between sleeping and waking.
Yeah, and apparently, I think they've even done studies on this, that people on DMT are also known to have very similar type of experiences and meetings with sort of otherworldly beings that look like Greys, for instance, right, in their sort of DMT experience. And a lot of them experience this as like some sort of like interdimensional, right, like encounter. And so I think there's something really interesting there. I think, some guy tried to sort of prove that, that made it, that all alien encounters were some type of hallucinogenic experience. But
right.
I think that's a big leap to take to say, well,
right, it's jumping the
just
gun a
because
little bit.
Right, you're able to induce these with, but I think John Lennon,
it's the same thing with the near-death experiences,
right?
Where it's like
yes.
people just are like, oh, okay, we can kind of induce these with oxygen deprivation, right. So therefore,
right.
Well,
you could flip it around and be like, oh, we're just scratching the surface on something, right? Like, John Lennon's experience. I think a lot of people who have taken, very intense hallucinogens are actually able to distinguish between what a hallucination feels like and what an actual experience feels like. Just like normal people in their dreams can sometimes have dreams that they know are of a different order, right? And so, a lot of times like people are like, oh, it was a hallucination they had. But like, on the most intense hallucinations, you don't like see like an alien walking up, or if you do, it's because you feel like you've been transported somewhere, right? So I think there's something definitely to be explored in there, about that topic. Maybe we'll do an episode about it, and
Yeah. And I mean, it's interesting. I mean, basically, you're presented with a choice. Are you going to believe what people say? And if people who, like John Lennon, know what it feels like to be high and hallucinate on a drug, say, well, this time it was different, are you going to believe them?
Right. Like, yeah, you can take people out. The people's experiences is what it is. Like, you can't, because it doesn't fit into your worldview, doesn't mean it's not of value, right?
Right.
So.
But I think in this whole realm of the paranormal, so much of it, people kind of like backfill.
Yes.
So it's like you start out with, I believe in the supernatural or God, or I do not believe in any of that. And then they kind of just like gather evidence to support it, or kind of, frame things in a certain way that kind of backs it up, instead of letting.
Right. Like that guy's, that meme of that guy from the, was it the Ancient Alien show? It says, I'm not saying it's aliens, but it's aliens. Right? Like it definitely happens on both sides. And I think there's
it does.
Much more to be gained.
Nature.
It's human nature. But there is much more to be gained to be like, well, let's just, take this phenomena at face value in a lot of ways. Like, why are we having these experiences? Why do people have these experiences? And if they are like dreams, then why do we dream these things, right? What does it tell us about who we are and where we're from and about the universe, right? So
we should, and we do need to do an episode on dreams.
Yes. Yeah, we'll do that. We'll do that in the new year. Cool, but I feel pretty good about this one. Our
so do I.
Celebrity edition alien encounters. It's pretty good. There's a lot in there that I didn't know about.
Yeah.
I feel like there's a lot more even still.
We could actually do like a whole other episode.
Yeah, maybe
so many stories out there.
Totally. Yeah, that Jackie Gleason one, I think I want to go into that one more. I think there's more to that.
Yeah, I want to hear all the details of that one.
Yeah. Okay, cool. So I guess this is our last episode of the year, right?
Yes, Happy New Year.
Happy New Year, everybody. And yeah, we'll be back maybe a little bit later in January. With some new episodes, a new year ahead of us. And we're
going to be doing some exciting new things.
Yes.
We're going to have some guests
on
the show telling their stories. And if you have any stories, we really want to hear them.
Yep.
You can send it to shadowlandpodcast@gmail.com. You should also follow us on Instagram.
Yep.
And you can see photos of things that we mention on our episodes. Like, I'm totally going to post a picture of Yuri Geller with that egg thing, the alien egg thing.
And if you're loving the podcast, definitely rate and review us on iTunes.
Yes,
definitely helps us get out there.
It definitely does. Yeah. Yes, please. 5 stars.
Yeah.
Tell us what you like. And if you have any ideas or,
stuff
things,
you want to
even
hear
if
more
if you disagree with something or you have
yeah.
information to the contrary, we want to know that too. So
cool. All right. Well, I guess that's it. So until next time.
Cool. Happy New Year, everybody.
Happy New Year. All right. Bye.
Bye.
Shadowland Podcast is produced by Seth Jablon and Christina Callaghan. Edited by Tim Kelly. Theme music by Tim Lakin.
Thanks, Tim.